We've talked in the last couple of videos about hierarchy, and one of the areas where it has the biggest impact in Canadian organizations is the relative importance of technical skills and soft skills. So we're going to look at it like this. Technical skills, most people are familiar with what that means. Typically, these are the things you learn explicitly in universities. For example, as an engineer, the ability to do calculations. As an accountant, the ability to calculate taxes. As an HR professional, your knowledge of labor laws, and so on. Soft skills, what do I mean by that? Well, I'm going to lump three sets of skills in soft skills. First one is your ability to work with other people. So interpersonal skills. The second set of skills I'm going to lump into soft skills is your ability to manage yourself. Managing your time, your energy, your emotions, your attention, your motivation, all this is going to be part of soft skills. For those of you who have heard the word emotional intelligence, well, that's part of it. And the last set of skills I'm going to lump into soft skills is your ability to manage the system. So for example, if you are a student in university and you want to take a course that is not part of your program, how do you make that happen? Some people are much better at this game than others. Now, if you've worked with people for a period of time, I'm sure you've noticed that technical skills and soft skills are independent. Some people have great technical skills and poor soft skills, while others have great soft skills and cannot turn their computer on. Okay? The two kinds of people exist. So technical skills and soft skills are independent. How do Canadian organizations break down their workforce? Well, very typically, when you join an organization in Canada, you will sooner or later be placed on a grid like this. Low, medium, high on each axis. Where does the average newcomer end up on this diagram when he or she lands physically in Canada? Well, in my experience, most immigrants will end up in the top left corner. Immigrants in Canada typically have high technical skills. By high technical skills, I'm measuring them relative to the Canadian population at large, not necessarily relative to the people in their own profession. Relative to the Canadian population at large, the average immigrant has high technical skills because of the point system that has been set up by Citizenship and Immigration Canada. In order to be allowed to come to Canada, you need enough points. If my memory serves me well, you need at least 67 points out of 100. And out of those 100 points, 25 are allocated to education. So as a result, the percentage of recent immigrants who have a bachelor's or more of education is significantly higher than the percentage of people born and raised in Canada who have a bachelor's or more of education. Immigrants in Canada are educated because we choose them on that basis. Now, here, obviously, I'm talking about people who come through regular immigration channels. What about people who bypass those channels? In other words, undocumented immigrants, as we would call them in Canada, or illegal aliens, as Americans would call them. Well, in the case of illegal immigrants in Canada, fundamentally, they cannot come to Canada. You see, this is probably one of the only times where being so far north is in our favor. Canada pretty much has complete control of its immigration policy. Yes, we have a few thousand people coming through the border from the United States in Quebec these days. But by and large, that number is very small compared with the number of regular immigrants, people who came to Canada through normal immigration channels. Okay? Just to quantify it. We're talking about a few thousand people in Quebec compared with 300,000 people who come every year through regular immigration channels in Canada. That difference makes a world of difference when you compare with, for example, the United States or Western Europe. Because in the United States or Western Europe, they have borders with countries where people want to come. So as a result, they have far more illegal immigrants in those countries. Let's take the United States to illustrate this point. I'm sure you all know that there's a large number of illegal immigrants in the United States. That number is estimated to be roughly 11 million these days. Canada has 10% of the American population. So if we had the same number of illegal immigrants on a per capita basis, 10% of 11 million would be 1.1 million. It's estimated we have 40,000. So in other words, a huge difference in terms of the number of illegal immigrants per capita. What difference does it make? Well, in my experience, it makes a world of difference, because when the average American meets the average Mexican, the average American will assume this person is here illegally and has no skills. If you want to look at that, you can watch the videos of Jeff Dunham, like the puppeteer. He has a whole video on with Jose Jalapeno, and where he talks about that, and you will see the typical American perspective on immigration there. By contrast, the average Canadian, when meeting the average immigrant, assumes you are here legally and you have skills. And that makes a world of difference. So let's come back to Canada. In Canada, immigrants have high technical skills because we have chosen them on that basis. Why do immigrants have low soft skills? Well, fundamentally, it's because soft skills are measured by cultural standards. There is no point in our point system allocated to soft skills. So as a result, some immigrants come to Canada with great soft skills by their home country standards. Some immigrants come to Canada with average soft skills by their home country standards. Some immigrants come with terrible soft skills by their home country standards. I worked with a Ukrainian software engineer who was a pain in the neck by both Ukrainian and Canadian standards. He managed to get himself fired before the end of his probation period. And in Canada, you got to do something pretty drastic from that to happen. In most cases, they will just wait until the end of your probation period and say, sorry, didn't work out. So, but the key point is this: soft skills are measured by cultural standards. So no matter where an immigrant was on this scale, when he or she arrives in Canada, by which standards are his or her soft skills measured? Well, they're going to be measured by Canadian standards. They're not higher or lower, they're different. Let me take my own example to illustrate this point. When I was in France, I was considered as having high soft skills. I was the captain of the rowing team in my university. I was one of the two founders of the first career fair in that university. Okay, a buddy of mine and I decided, hey, other universities have career fairs, we don't, we should have one. And 28 years later, this career fair still runs every year. And I also was the maître d' in a restaurant. So all situations that clearly require high soft skills. When I arrived in Canada, my soft skills went overnight from high to low. I did not change overnight. What changed overnight was the criteria that the people around me were using to measure my soft skills. And if you have seen the video on feedback, you will know why. It's when I gave negative feedback. When I gave negative feedback, instead of saying, oh, it's a good report, you may want to look at section 3 some more, but overall good work. In other words, instead of giving feedback sandwiches, what I did was I told people, it's redo section 3, it's wrong. And as a result, when I was at P&G, no technician wanted to report to me initially. I wish I was kidding. So the crux of the matter is this: what are the relative weights that we place on technical skills and soft skills? The answer will obviously depend on your job. Some jobs are more technical in nature than others. If I think of my own experience, when I worked for Xerox, at one point I was a researcher, and obviously that was a highly technical job. At another point I was a commercial development engineer, and my job was to sell Xerox patents to other organizations. And during that period of time, part of my job was going to conferences to kind of advertise our patents. So obviously there, soft skills matter more to me as a commercial development engineer than as a researcher. And that's true for many, many jobs. But if I do the average of all professional jobs, so by professional I mean anybody who needs a university or college degree to do their job, what I find in Canada is that we tend to weigh technical skills and soft skills approximately equally. On average, obviously, depends on the job, but on average it's going to be 50-50. There's another very important point. As you move up in an organization in Canada, the weight that increases is the weight placed on soft skills. One situation where the difference is really striking is accounting firms. When you're hired at the entry level, people really want to know that you're a good accountant and that you understand tax laws. To become a partner in an accounting firm, you need to be able to sell projects. That's going to be the number one skill. So at that point, client relationship management become critical to your success. With 50-50, lines of equal value in Canada will be diagonal. What I mean by that is anybody along this line brings the same value as the person in the top left corner. In the home countries of immigrants. So remember we said most of the countries where immigrants come from to Canada today are significantly more hierarchical than Canada is. So in hierarchical cultures, the weights placed on technical skills and soft skills are very different from 50-50. It's more like 90-10. There's far more emphasis on technical skills and conversely, far less emphasis on soft skills. Why is that? Well, in hierarchical cultures, you don't need to convince your employee to do it your way. You're the boss, that's reason enough. Remember the slide when we were looking at the very large manager in hierarchical cultures and much smaller manager in egalitarian cultures? That's the idea. So in hierarchical cultures, you don't really need nearly as much soft skills to be a good manager. What you do need is good technical skills. You need to be able to tell your employees how you want them to do their job. From step 1 to step 10, because if you forget step 7, the whole thing grinds to a halt or goes completely off track. For example, one soft skill where the difference is absolutely striking is making good presentations. That soft skill is critical for your success in Canada. You won't go much beyond the first level of supervision if you don't make good presentations. You can measure the importance of a soft skill by looking at the age at which kids start learning that soft skill. In Canada, at what age does the average Canadian kid make his or her first public presentation? Well, the answer is typically kindergarten. It's show and tell. Show and tell for most Canadian kids is the first public presentation. So concretely, what does it mean? Well, the teacher will tell the kid, tomorrow I want you to bring a toy or your blanket or a stuffed animal or a picture that is really meaningful to you, and I want you to present that picture to the class. Explain what it means to you. All right? That is the first public presentation of just about any Canadian kid. And Canadian kids continuously make presentations throughout the educational system. Okay? By contrast, what happens in the home countries of immigrants? Well, I've asked rooms full of immigrants from all over the world, at what age did you make your first public presentation? Well, if they went through the public educational system in their home countries, the answer is typically high school, university, in the workplace. When I got to Canada, never. If I take my own example, I grew up in France. My first public presentation was in grade 9. Now, I stood in front of the class before, but the first time I had to choose a subject, do the research, prepare the presentation, and present was in grade 9. My wife is Chinese. Her first public presentation was defending her undergraduate thesis. In other words, she was 22 by the time she presented for the first time. Now, I'm sure you all know, Chinese kids will take Canadian kids on mathematics any day. Why is that? Well, in every country, you get what you pay for. The educational system is set up to teach the kids what the adults think is important to know to succeed. So Chinese professors spend way more time teaching mathematics and way less time teaching presentations than Canadian professors do. It's not right, it's not wrong, it's different. But here, this is a difference that most people are unaware of, and it creates major challenges in the workplace. With 90-10, lines of equal value will be almost diagonal. It takes a lot of additional soft skills to compensate a small drop in technical skills, since there is so little weight on the soft skills. This is the reason so many immigrants get so frustrated during their careers. At some point, it kind of looks like this. Let's say a recent immigrant, candidate A, is competing for a job or promotion with candidate B. So A has great technical skills, poor soft skills by Canadian standards. B may not have as good technical skills, but has much better soft skills by Canadian standards. Well, between A and B, who will get that promotion? Who will get that job? Well, if the people who make the decision are Canadians, then they will prefer B. Because by Canadian standards, B brings more value than A. How will A interpret the situation? Well, to many immigrants, this is unfair. This is discrimination. Why? Because by my home country standards, I bring more value than B. The trouble is, I don't understand how my managers measure my performance. And this is something I would like to encourage every viewer to do. Discuss with your manager in specific terms, how is your performance measured? Okay? I'll come back to this point in a minute. I'll take my own example to illustrate this point. When I was at Procter & Gamble, at one point, I competed with a guy for a promotion. I have a PhD, he has a bachelor's. No technician wants to report to me because of the way I give negative feedback. He's quite popular. What do you think happened? Well, he got the promotion. Not only that, but they made him my boss, which was adding insult to injury. How did I interpret the situation? Well, it's unfair. It's discrimination. Because in France, a PhD beats a bachelor's any day. Trouble is my managers are not French, they're Canadian, and they're not measuring my performance that way. So, in my case, well, so the key question becomes, how do your managers measure your performance? And remember, I said, I want you to discuss that with your managers in detail. Why do I insist on these words? Well, remember, in an earlier video, we talked about what does being on time mean. And we discussed the fact that being on time means different things to different people. So let's say that you and your manager agree that being punctual is important in your job. The trouble is, if you don't define what being punctual means, then you'll end up in a situation where you have an agreement which is empty. It will not withstand the test of time, because you may be on time by your standards without being on time by your boss's standards, or vice versa. All right, so I would like everyone to remember 3 fundamental points from this chart, okay? 1, soft skills matter more in Canada than in the home countries of immigrants. 2, soft skills are measured by cultural standards. And 3, you really need to understand how is your performance measured by your managers. There's one other point which I would like to develop here at this point now. It's, what does the average candidate A do at this point? You know, I've been bypassed for a job or promotion. I think it's unfair, but what do I do? Well, there's three very common reactions of the average candidate A at that point. They make complete sense if you understand where they come from, where they grew up. They don't work in Canada, but they're natural reactions because of the way of the environment in which people grew up. So reaction number one of the average candidate A is, I'm going to complain. Who does the average immigrant complain to? Well, typically immigrants who come from the same country I come from. I'm French, I complain to other French people. I'm Chinese, I complain to other Chinese people. Does that help me? The answer is no, but it feels wonderful because the people I complain to see the world the same way and they validate my feelings and my interpretation. You're right, it is discrimination. And at that point, I have seen a lot of immigrants get into what I call the blind leading the blind. They get advice from other immigrants who come from the same country they come from, who have been in Canada longer. But the fact that these people have been in Canada longer does not mean they understand how Canada works better. I can tell, I've experienced this when I worked at Xerox. There was one French lady who, every time I run into difficulties, my first reaction was go talk to Danielle. That was her first name. The conversation between Danielle and I invariably went like this. We both agreed Canadians have no clue how to work together. But hey, we're here, so I need to change my behavior. So she gave me advice. Her advice made complete sense. It didn't work. My situation turned around when I started to get advice from Canadians. Their advice made no sense to me, but it worked because they understood how the system works. So I really want to encourage every immigrant to find themselves a cultural mentor. Somebody who understands how Canada works and has been able to accomplish what they're trying to accomplish. Another very common reaction of the average candidate A is, I'm going to look for another job. This company is not merit-based, so I'll go find another one that is. And so if the economy is buoyant, then people will find jobs very easily. If you think of Alberta when oil was at $100 a barrel, if you were not happy with your job, you could get another one within 2 weeks. And so at that point, these differences, or the impact of these cultural differences, created tremendous retention issues in the oil and gas industry. Now there's no retention issue in the oil and gas industry, okay? But as a result, I ended up doing workshops for many oil and gas companies for this reason, helping people understand that jumping ship will not help because then people run into the same difficulties with another set of people. Because fundamentally, the issue is much deeper. It's not individual, it's not organization, it's culture. The third reaction, which is very, very common for the average candidate A, is this. Particularly if the economy is not good, I cannot get another job, but I still want to make myself more promotable or more employable. So what will I do? Well, I'm going to go back to university, get a higher degree. And in other words, I'm going to try and get more technical skills. That, in many cases, does not solve my problem because I'm working on the wrong issue. I don't need a master's degree. I need Toastmasters. But people don't know, and they don't know they don't know. And I have seen people, I think the most extreme example was a guy who had a PhD and 10 sets of letters after his name, and he was still unemployed because he could not describe what kind of problems he could solve. In his mind, he could solve any kind of problem. So this is probably the biggest area where cultural differences, particularly hierarchy differences, have the biggest impact on immigrants and Canadian organizations. It's understanding that soft skills matter more in Canada than in the home countries of immigrants, and that soft skills are measured by cultural standards.